Okay, so look, thanks for joining me this morning, everyone. This is our second workshop looking at Turnitin. And this time round, what we're going to be doing in this workshop is looking at marking and grading in Turnitin for given that all of the subjects that are now part of the pilot from the three schools all have the Turnitin assignments set up in their subject sites. With I guess the caveat being that a number of them still have yet to have the rubrics for marking attached to them, but the actual submission portals are in place for all of the subjects. So there's about, at the end of the day, there's about 110 Turnitin portals that have been set up for this across about 60 or so subject sites in 3 different kind of schools and areas set up. So today we're looking at the subjects associated with the BED K-12 that are in the pilot. So that's my preamble. Welcome. It's great to see you all again. And today is going to be very much an informal affair. So I want you to feel free to come off mute, pull me up, ask questions, put things in the chat, which I'll get to. It's absolutely being recorded, Rachel, which I've got on at the moment. And look, I've started really sharing my screen just to show you, I guess, the spreadsheet that I'm working off in this process, which sort of shows me getting assignment information from outlines, etc., along with due dates, the portals being put in place, and then finally the rubrics being provisioned and attached. And so we're about halfway for the rubrics in general, but that's quickly escalating, particularly this week and beyond. All right, so yeah, I can see some questions coming in. Andrew, do students need to create their own Turnitin account? No, they do not. The beauty of the assignment portals in Blackboard means that if the students have signed in and gone into their I2 site, they can go in and submit the assignment, and their Turnitin account is already created as part of that process. So they literally just go in and submit the assignment and get their originality scores, etc. And you can start grading, etc. There's no separate account creation possible. What I would like to add on that note, because I have gotten this question a few times, on the student portal, there is a page that students have access to called plagiarism checking. And this refers them to a pre-existing process where they can create an account and basically check their assignments without their work ever being registered on the global Turnitin repository. So it's a risk-free submission process that has been set up by Sam Parker for students to use. And it basically points them towards this document and says every school has this sort of generic account or submission point that the students can add themselves to. And at that point, they can start submitting anything, anytime, without it being saved anywhere to get an indication of their scores. That's not the process that we're using for the assignment portals in the subject sites, but the two of them do have a relationship of sorts. And I want to point out the difference between the two. When we use an assignment portal in a subject site, the student can submit up until the due date as many times as they like, overriding their submission each time, so it doesn't count against itself. And at the due date, their submission is final. When they're using the assignment portals, that is saved in the global Turnitin repository. So if they were to do that, for example, along the way, and then go and use another tool like this to check the same piece of work, it's going to come back 100% because the work has been saved and submitted somewhere else. So that's kind of the difference that we need to point out to them at times. From my point of view, if they're using the assignment portal we create for the task to submit their work multiple times as they adjust their work prior to the due date, there's not an issue. They don't get that match. But if they're submitting their assignments in different places, then that potentially can happen. So I just wanted to point that out before we start jumping into the actual assignment portals. Okay, for the purpose of today's demonstration, and I did see Christina in here a minute ago, I actually have EML 447 and the first assignment portal to have a look at, because we have a couple of submissions in there already, so we can actually have a look at the document as it stands in the portal ready for marking. So what I'm going to do is open up, which one was it that I had going on? 447, and it was internal. Okay. All right, so look, in this subject site, assignment 1 is an action plan. We go in here the same way the students do. We go into the submission portal itself. It's going to open up our assignment dashboard, which is the view that we see as instructors. Students don't see the full list of their classmates, just their own submission. And what we see here with the assignment is we've had 2 submissions already. I think my understanding is this is due towards the end of this week, or very shortly anyway. Christine, is that right?
It's due on Friday, yes.
Yep. Okay. So we've had a couple of submissions already. Technically, we're saying that the students, even the ones that have submitted, could resubmit and make adjustments to their work prior to the due date. That function is there for them to overwrite that existing file. However, it's already in here. The other date to keep in mind, if we go up here and click on the cog for this assignment, the settings cog, we'll see that some areas are grayed out, indicating that we can't make changes to them in here, such as the due date and how much it's worth, for example. This is a satisfactory, unsatisfactory task, which is why the grade is 1. If you're familiar with the way Grade Center works with satisfactory, unsatisfactory tasks, a 0 is unsatisfactory and satisfactory is 1. That's the way the Grade Center deals with that sort of thing. But what I want to point out is that this important date down the bottom here, the feedback release date, is when the students get back their assignment and their mark. That's when they're visible and accessible to them, either through My Grades in the subject site, or they can come back into the same assignment portal in Turnitin and get their feedback and their grade that way as well. So there's 2 ways for them to access that piece of information.
Is that just fed from the subject outline, Lachlan, or have you had to input all those?
I put it in manually. Yeah, when I created the assignments, I've had to put that information in.
Thank you, Lachlan.
Yeah, no problem. And I have had people say to me at different times, things like the due dates have changed, and therefore the feedback or the release date changes. You can change those, but you can only change the feedback date inside the Turnitin portal. The actual due date itself, if that needs to change after the assignment has been provisioned, you have to go and edit the actual assignment item in I2. So if you were to edit this, you can change the due date in here. Okay, so the due date can be modified, but it has to be done in I2. And the feedback and release date for the assignment, which is the date that the grade is released, as well as the feedback, that can be changed inside the Turnitin portal.
Excuse me, Lachlan.
Yep.
Sorry, I've already had in the distance version a couple of people inquiring about extensions.
Yep.
Is this could you explain how we change the due date for an individual then?
Okay, so
or does it stay the same?
It stays the same, in that the students can submit work after the due date. There's nothing that stops them submitting into the Turnitin portals after the due date, but the handling of late submission is on the instructor, basically, whether it's late, for example, and what penalties are applied to it, etc. There's nothing in the portal that blocks them from submitting past the due date for the task. So if you're using other tools like Assist or other things to handle your extensions process or whatever, or just doing it manually, nothing stops them from still submitting the task in here after the due date. But what we will find, if we go into our dashboard, is that the uploaded date, you'll see here that it's black, for example, it's all fine. This is before the due date. Once the due date passes, these will be marked as red. So they are clearly identifiable as late submissions in this list.
Okay, thank you very much, Lachlan.
That's okay. All right, so look, let's have a look at what the grading process looks like with our submissions. And what I want to point out here as well, in case Christina or anyone else is worried, is that none of the changes that I'm going to be making here get released to the students. For example, we'll clear all of those. This is just to demonstrate how the process works. So from this top-down view from the dashboard, we can see the reports if we wanted to engage with those. But what I'm going to do is actually click on grade. And that will open up the Turnitin Feedback Studio. And we get the students' work along the left and our panel for scrutinizing the document along the right. So I'm going to make this full screen so we've got a bit more real estate to work with. Can everyone see that okay? Yep, okay. Kind of three main areas that we're dealing with here. One of them being the blue section at the top, which is our grading tools, the red section in the middle, which is the similarity reports, and you can click through each of these areas. So the students got a 9% match for their task, which seems pretty reasonable. And when we click on the number 9, it'll actually bring up each of those individual submissions and where they're coming from. You can also order them, so all of the sources will come up in a list as such. There are a few tools if you're familiar with the Turnitin toolset for scrutinizing submissions and where they've come from. And you also have the ability to flag sections of it as well if you're worried about that aspect. What I will point out is the way the assignments are set up across the board is it does not include citations and bibliographic materials. Right, they are excluded from the originality check. So that's the way that the Turnitin assignments in general are set up. They also exclude small matches, which means 5 words or less are not included in a match as well. So that's where our numbers are coming from. Now, to use the marking tools inside the Feedback Studio, there are a number of ways to do it. The first one being that you can click anywhere within the document itself and you get some annotation type tools. The one in the middle is a speech bubble, which allows us to put in a comment. This section, blah, blah, blah. We can remove these as well later on. There's a delete button here, for example. You can drag those around if you need to. You also included in that, you can include hyperlinks, you can copy and paste comments. If you're using quick marks, for those of you, I know there are a number of academics more familiar with the Turnitin marking suite. If you have a bank of quick marks established or comments preset that you want to drag in to the document, you can also use those and drag and drop into the task. And also on top of that, you can use this inline text feature, which basically means you can type a comment and then drag that wherever you want it to be. You just got to move your mouse around to get those crosshairs. Not quite sure why I've dragged it out that way, but anyway, because I'm near the edge, that's why. Anyway, before I make a mess of this, I'll just delete all of these. All right, so you can do inline commenting and annotating. I'll come back and get those. Most commonly what's used when grading in the Turnitin papers is this second area, which is basically your summary comment at the end of the paper, which you could copy and paste from elsewhere, or you could type it in and it'll sit alongside the students. When they get their grade back, it comes as a hyperlink and it will open up the Feedback Studio with all the stuff that you're looking at in here available to the students, including their final sort of commentary, which will go in there, for example, can be hyperlinked. There's not a huge range of text features available in here, but you can put in hyperlinks if you need to. And above that, you also get the voice comment feature, which means that if you've got a headset, for example, you can record up to 3 minutes of a voice comment on the submission. So if that's part of your intended kind of approach for providing feedback, you can hit the record button and it will save up to 3 minutes of audio commentary on the task as well. And again, when the students get their grade, they click on the link, it opens this interface up and they can listen to the feedback and read the feedback as well. Possibly the part that you might be more interested in than anything else is the last section, which is the rubric. Once we click on that, we get a condensed form of the rubric, which is sort of a Likert scale up the top, a summary underneath. But really, probably most people are going to be clicking on these crosshairs that are here, which will open up the full rubric. In this case, it's satisfactory, unsatisfactory, for example. You click on which part of the rubric you feel that the student has met. And when they have multiple criterion, you can select each criterion area that the student has met for the task. Now, a couple of academics have expressed interest in using a graded rubric where it's allocating points against each of the rubric criterion. And that's fine. I'm happy to work with you on setting those up. But in most cases, they are a qualitative rubric, which means that you are clicking on which parts of the rubric you feel the student has met, which criterion they've met and which standard they've met for the task. All of those are auto-saved and attached to the student work, and they get those after the feedback release date, which is set for 8 a.m. on that date that's in the subject outline for the feedback release. They don't get them earlier than that unless you change that feedback release date. Keep in mind that this task at the moment doesn't have a grade attached to it. That needs to be entered up here at the top. And then at that point, after we pass the date, the feedback release date, it flows through to the grade center, and the task is there, the student gets it in My Grades, it's hyperlinked, and they get to open up the whole thing. Things like the word count, etc., are available down the bottom.
Lachlan?
Yep.
If you're using the qualitative approach to grade, and like I assume that's where you have to add like the total mark at the top. In the previous sort of rubrics that you would just attach to a Word document, you would be able to show the grades for each part of the rubric. Is that possible here?
You can type in, there's one of the options for the rubrics allows you to type things into the different fields in the rubric, and that would allow for that if you wanted to put that in, but it doesn't tally them for you.
Yeah.
So it would be essentially the same as annotating the existing rubric. Yeah.
I just wanted to check if it was possible to do.
Yep, absolutely.
Thanks, Lachlan.
Interestingly, if we also have a look at the grade center inside the subject, I want to show how the relationship between the assignment portals and the grade center works in both directions. Not only does it flow from Turnitin into the grade center, but you can also use your grade center to get back into Turnitin as the instructors, and in fact, keep track of your submissions. So what we can see here in that first assignment is the submissions already showing up in the grade center as they come in. So you don't just have to go into the assignment portal. And if I click on those, it will order that in that task column, it'll put the submissions at the top, the ones that have come in. And I can actually see both of those attempts. And I can then click on grade user activity, and it will open the assignment in Turnitin to begin the grading, which may not seem like a huge thing, but if you've got a very big cohort of students, particularly if they are separated by perhaps cohort, if it's a merged subject site, it means that we can set up grading groups for the cohorts, and you can go in and do all of your grading just for your cohort. So it's a way of organizing the marking teams as well. But that's not done through Turnitin. It's done through the Grade Center, which will let us go through this back door into Turnitin. Does that make sense? All right, I'm going to stop there for a second before I jump back into Turnitin and see where the commentary's at, what questions people have at this point in time. Yeah, anything really. What have people got to say?
Oh, hi, Lachlan. It's Rachel here. I've written a couple of comments in the chat. Not wanting to interrupt you. So just to clarify, if they submit to the other Turnitin portal, not in their actual subject, after the assignment 1 or 2 final submission date, it will come back as 100% match for them, but it won't if it is before the final submission date.
Okay,
Correct?
not quite. So if they use just this tool, it doesn't submit it anywhere. So if they were using this to begin with, just to submit work to get an indication, it's not saved anywhere.
Right.
If they were to submit it in the subject site, in the Turnitin portal, in the subject site as part of the drafting process into the assignment folder, and then they were resubmitting over the top of it, that's saved globally. It won't count for them in here. If they keep resubmitting over the top of it, it's the same document. So it doesn't, it won't give them that 100% match. But if they submit it in here first and then go somewhere else, like this Check My Assignment tool, then it's already been submitted somewhere. And that's what I'm saying is going to bring back that 100% match, because they've already been using the assignment portal to submit their documents. Does that make sense?
To me, yeah, that's happened to me with students where they've come to me and asked me questions about that. So basically they need to make sure that they're doing it in the right order in a way. And will that be explained to them somewhere so that we don't have to explain it all?
I'm going to record, I'll put a video into the getting started for each of the subject sites in the pilot that explain that. But really, I guess from my point of view, I want them using the assignment portals for the entire process of the assignment. So that means the drafting, the resubmitting, putting the document in over the top. That's part of the educative approach of using the tool, is doing everything all in the one location and not having parts of this process happening in disparate parts of either the subject side or the student portal or other tool sets. So I don't kind of want to give them false information in that sense that says, oh, maybe you also want to consider going over here and using this thing, but it's important that they have that information about the relationship between the two. So I'll make a recording trying to clarify it, but it can get confusing. If you're using this thing just in general for all of your uni work before you ever submit a final assignment, then that's fine. That will work as an approach. It won't be saved anywhere, and it can just be for your purposes. But if you start, I guess, dipping your toe in multiple pools, there's going to be repercussions of that sort.
That's great, thank you. Just on that note then, because a lot of our students are used to using the other portal, and they're familiar with that document that you've got up now. Mm-hmm. And so they often do it before they even go into another portal. Mm-hmm. So basically we just say focus on the portal.
Yeah, look, it won't matter if they're using this first. It will matter if they're going in here and start submitting things and then going back out into the other one.
Yes.
That's it. So it's the order of doing things. If they only want to use this for their final submission, fine. That's no skin off anyone's back at that point. If they're using these generic portals as well as the assignment portal and going backwards and forwards between them, there's going to be a problem.
Yeah, thank you. And one last question. You mentioned about the feedback being automatically released on the day at 8 a.m.
Yep.
That how can we hold that back? Because often I'm certainly not ready to release it at 8 a.m. and neither are my markers. So how can, because I often release at the end of the day, because we can release it at 11:59. Want to in the evening, because we've got a full day, haven't we? When we're dealing with huge cohorts, as we are in the online subjects, we don't want to have an 8 a.m. release because we're still tidying up all the admin and getting the exec cohort feedback and so on.
Okay, so you can absolutely change the release date and time, and that happens inside the Turnitin portal. We go up to the cog, the settings for the task. And that's this field down here at the bottom. At the moment, you'll see it's at 8 a.m. You can click on it and then change that. It uses a 24-hour clock, for example. So you could change that to 23:59. And at that point, it's now 1 minute to midnight before when it actually gets released.
Yeah, and then sorry, so then when we have set that feedback release, if we don't want to release it at 11:59 and we want to release it earlier, we just go back in and change that?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. As long as the only limitation is that it needs to be after the due date and time. So as long as it can be the following day. If you've got it done and you're happy that it's all ready to go, then you can change this and it will flow through to the grade center and they'll get access to their grades.
Perfect.
That's on you. Yep.
Thank you.
Who else has got some questions? Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, my mind, you showed us the rubric and the allocation of a satisfactory, unsatisfactory. What about where we're actually giving a numerical mark in the rubric?
Right. Okay. So that's a quantitative rubric. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you show that?
I don't have one to show with you because I have to manually set them up. And I'm happy to do that. If you've got, have you got a rubric in the ones that you sent me?
Well,
that
the two
has
rubrics, yeah, the
scores?
two rubrics I sent you.
Mhm.
Right? Obviously, you've got the criterion for fail, pass, credit, etc. The assignment itself is a mark out of X number.
Yep.
So how do you then apportion the marks? Because there'll be a range, because a credit range is 65 to 74. Well, that could be a baseline mark of 5 and an upper level mark of 6.5.
Yeah. So we have to work on them individually, I guess, to have a look at that, because it doesn't allow you to put in a range of scores. It'll put in like a median in the range in each of the criterion. So for example, if your credit score is, what are we saying, 65 to 74, for example, then it's going to come up at the halfway point, and that's what it'll give for that particular criterion.
Well, that's counter to how we mark. I mean,
or you can type it in individually. For example, if you need to be able to type in the score in the range. Well, that's the difference between using it as I guess the qualitative approach and you deciding outside of the tool what the grade is. But the mechanism itself is not that sophisticated, the Turnitin marking mechanism, that it will allow you to put in, it allows you to choose the criterion so that you can say, well, it's the credit area, which is between 65 and 74. But how does it know which number in that field? It won't let you put in a number anywhere between those.
If there was a sliding scale, you could then adjust to the scoring, whatever that point allocation range would be.
Yeah, to my knowledge, that you can't do that within each of the criterion areas.
I mean, some students might, we might assess them as being an upper level credit, because there's a big difference between 65 and 74.
Yeah.
So we need an ability to make an objective appraisal of the work in order to allocate a number, because that's the name of the game at the end. So
you can type in a number for like the score for that criterion individually. You can definitely do that, but you can't, it doesn't allow you to use kind of a slider, for example, to move between. But we'll have to have a look at the rubric that you've put in, for example, and see how we can use that. Otherwise, for example, the determining of the marks against each of those would need to be done outside of this, and then the grade typed in manually into the portal.
Because notionally, based on what you're saying, that everybody that we select as a credit, everyone will get a 70. Everyone we select as a distinction will get 80, and so on and so forth. And that doesn't allow you to distinguish between merit. Anyway,
for that criterion. Yeah, I get what you're saying. So it's not over the overall mark. It's for the individual criterion that it chooses that median.
Correct.
Yeah, we have done some testing as well on about 20 different assignments that had been pre-marked using that kind of individual scale, and then seeing what the difference was between using the Turnitin medians as well. And the results were very, very close. Like it's still, the final mark still comes out almost identical based on that. But yeah, well, I'll have to spend some more time looking at that.
All right, thanks.
No problem. Other questions and comments, folks? Not at this point. I'll just check the chat pod and see if I've missed other things in there. Right, qualitative comments in the rubric sections. Yep. I will open up some other tasks so you can see rubrics that have the full, I guess, range of commentary in there. Let's have a look at some of the others that are provisioned. There we go, 409. Let's have a look at that. Okay, so 5 propositions. So we haven't had any submissions in there, so I can't open the rubric from the student submissions, but I can actually open up how the rubric works through the settings. Click on that optional settings area underneath. And if we scroll down for how the assignment's been set up, we'll see that the rubric's been attached there, but we can open up. This is the tool that we use to load the rubrics in, the rubric manager. Comes up with a generic one, and all of them have been preloaded in here with their subject codes. So if I find EMR 409 assignment 1, 5 propositions. This is what the rubric looks like at this point in time, with each of the criterion along the left. And then when you're marking it, as it's set up down the bottom here as a qualitative rubric, it means that you are just selecting which criterion cell they've met for the task. And that's what the students will receive back, the rubric with the highlighted cell that they've met for the task. But we
so
can...
Lachlan,
Yep.
Sorry for interrupting there. So my understanding from what Andrew was saying, is this, or that sort of discussion, is this where we can, if we clicked on, for example, part 1, a credit, but we wanted to give them a 70 specifically, is that where we can type in underneath there in that box, in the credit box for part 1? So is that where, like at the end of that comment, we click on that and it highlights into blue or whatever, and then we can type in our mark 70 or whatever it might be out of 10 or something, whatever it's designated as? Sorry, that's not a very clear question.
No, but no, it's not a criticism of you. It's that I don't have a lot of answers around the how well the rubrics function at this point, because I haven't played with them extensively.
Okay.
I know that there's 3 options for the rubrics. The qualitative one is the one that's kind of being used extensively for the pilot, but it allows us also to have a scoring process where you can type in a score at the top of each of the boxes.
Okay. Yep.
Right?
Yep. That's all I needed to know.
And that will tally those numbers for you in determining the final grade. And it also takes into account weighting that you can establish as well for the different criterion if you need to do that. So there is a way that allows you to individually put in grades against criterion if you want to do that. Okay. The last one is where the values for each of the criterion cells is predetermined. So that's where that 0.00, and that's the one where I was talking about. You have to determine what the value is for that column. So essentially, that's why they'd been using a median for between that field, and then it will take that number, add them up across the 4, and give you the result. Those are our 3 options to work within for the tool set.
Beautiful. And where does it? I know this is a stupid question. Where does it show you the mark that it's added up? Where does that come up?
Yeah, so that comes out in the students' work when we're looking at the actual submissions. We'll have a look at another one. When you're doing the actual grading, it appears at the top.
Oh yes, across the top. Okay, all right. So we don't have to manually put it in there. It just automatically comes up there.
If you're using a rubric like that to put in your own values, it will automatically populate up the top.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
That's okay. They're good questions. Yeah, so it'll appear up here if you're using your rubric that way. Yeah.
Sorry, Lachlan, just to pick that up, we talked last time via email, I think, about the partial highlighting of a rubric and how sometimes students stretch across 3 different grades for a particular criterion. So how do we resolve that situation?
Look, to be honest, I haven't found a way yet within the rubric itself, what you can actually do within the rubric apart from either selecting the entire cell to indicate they've met that part. Doesn't seem to allow you to mark it up beyond that, the actual rubric itself, whereas annotating the actual student's work is not a problem, but annotating the rubric seems to be problematic from what I've seen so far. I'm still looking into it, basically. I've got a lawnmower outside. I apologize for that. So yeah, I haven't found a solution yet. Sorry, Rachel.
Sorry, just further to that. I wonder, do you have to click on each of the criteria? Like, do you have to nominate a criteria?
If you're using a qualitative rubric with your marking, then yes.
Right.
So remember, I'll just bring that up again. Hang on.
So I was just wondering if we could make comments about being able to record oral statements like feedback.
Yep.
Can we do that in at the same time as using the rubric, or is that so? Like
the rubric is attached to the student submission.
Yep.
In this form, without, you can't mark it up essentially.
Okay. All right.
Right. You can add scores to it, which will allow you to put in those grades.
Yeah.
But it's not going to allow you to, you don't attach anything else to the rubric. It comes as an attachment to the student's marked up paper.
Okay.
And the other types of additions to the student submission include the audio feedback, the final summary comments, all that stuff. Yeah, that all is accessed via the hyperlink that they get in My Grades.
Yeah, yeah. So really it's going to make us make our rubrics much sharper, because if we've got 3 points in one criteria, that, as Rachel was saying, you know, sometimes we mark across the rubric for, you know, even in one criteria. So it means maybe that in the end, if that's the way that Turnitin works, we're going to have to make our criteria, each criteria completely separate from the other one, which is going to be a nightmare, but so that we can actually say, okay, well, you've either done this or you haven't, you've done this or you haven't. Do you know what I mean? I'm not explaining myself very well.
No, I get what you're saying. Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's, to be honest, it has to be a separate conversation for this process in the first instance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, you know, at this stage, we're just trying to identify what affordances using this integration can give us.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a functional implementation first before we get into, I guess, the more
Yeah, that's fine, not a problem. Just forget I asked.
No, look, it's all valid. It needs to all go into the evaluation data as well, about what it can do and what it doesn't do and what it does well and what it does poorly, all that kind of stuff. So no, I absolutely appreciate all of that. And yeah, I mean, it's not perfect, but what I am hoping to see at the very least is people talking about the time that it saved them on having to do other processes previously associated with the submission, grading and academic integrity processes. That's what I'm looking for. All right. So look, as I get the rest of the rubrics, etc., and I'm adding them to the assignments, the submission portals, as I said, for all of the subjects involved in the pilot, have all been created. So worst case scenario, we're at the stage where we don't have a rubric attached to an assignment, but the students can still submit theirs and look at the subject outline for that. So I'm getting to those. Probably got about 70 out of 100 so far. So we're getting there. We are getting there. I think basically I'm about done with what I was going to show you today, unless you've got other questions around how the process works. But I'll be expecting, obviously, to talk to any of you that have got follow-up questions, or you want to discuss any aspect of how it's been set up, and certainly more work around the rubric side of things with people as we go as well. Sarah, go ahead.
Sorry.
That's okay.
You're going to hate me. Is there like a sandpit play area that we can go in that's not going to influence anybody's real work, but we can just go in and have a play around and see how it works.
The way to do it is if you turn on your student mode inside your
Yep.
subject, for example, you can submit an assignment yourself as a student. So if you turn on the student preview,
Oh,
go into any of those task areas, you can upload a document yourself and that will appear inside the portal. You go back in as an instructor and you can grade your own assignment and play around with it.
okay, great. That's
That's
fantastic.
your
Thank you.
workaround.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Liz, you can absolutely go in and have a look around. That's not a problem. It depends whether or not I've got the rubric attached as to whether or not you'll see that yet. If I've got them, they've all been attached. I think there's 1 or 2 exceptions, but I'm still grabbing some of those Excel spreadsheets were fun to play with. Let me put it that way. Anyway, I'm happy to hang around for a few minutes if people have any other questions, but I'm aware we're over time. So thanks all for coming and happy Turnitin. See you all the next one.
Thanks, Lachlan.
Thanks.
Thank you. That's a great job. Well done.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lachlan.
Stop the recording.